Gentlemen, if you woke up last night stumbling half asleep to the bathroom again, gripping the wall for balance, waiting for a strong stream that never comes, listen carefully, because what I am about to say may genuinely surprise you. Many of you believe your prostate is deteriorating because of age, hormones, genetics, or bad luck. But the painful biological truth is that the way you are drinking water every single day may be the real reason you cannot sleep through the night, why you stand over the toilet for minutes waiting for a weak trickle, and why no matter what you do, there is always that final humiliating drip that stains your underwear. Here is the paradox that almost no one ever explains to older men. Drinking water the wrong way can actually drive prostate inflammation and force you to urinate more, while drinking it the right way can reduce that inflammation and stop nighttime urination in as little as 24 hours. That means relief can start not next month, not next week, but by tomorrow morning. My name is Dr. William Lee. I am a physician and scientist who has spent decades studying how the body heals itself, with a particular focus on vascular health, tissue inflammation, and the biological power of simple daily inputs. After years of working with men whose prostate symptoms were driven not by irreversible disease, but by correctable habits, I have identified a hydration strategy that restores control, restores dignity, and restores sleep. Stay with me. This may change everything. Before we go further, if you are committed to ending nighttime urination and reclaiming control of your bladder, subscribe now and turn on notifications. Every week I share practical, science-based strategies designed specifically for men over 60. And if you are ready to begin fixing this today, type "I'm ready" in the comments. Now let's get into the real biological reason your prostate is working against you and the precise shift that can stop it. 1. Why hydration controls prostate swelling. Most men don't realize this, but the very thing driving prostate swelling, bladder irritation, and fragmented nights of sleep isn't age, isn't genetics, and isn't simply bad luck. It is something far more fundamental, something so silent you never think to question it. It is chronic dehydration, not the dramatic extreme thirst you imagine, but a quiet cumulative dehydration that builds hour after hour, day after day, year after year, the kind that moves through the body without a clear alarm signal, until one day you find yourself standing at the toilet, waiting for a stream your body refuses to produce. Here is the physiological truth I want every man over 60 to understand. When the body does not receive adequate water, urine becomes concentrated, acidic, and chemically irritating. That concentrated urine sits inside the bladder and presses against the outlet where the prostate surrounds the urethra like a collar that is slowly tightening. When that inflamed tissue is repeatedly exposed to acidic urine, a biological cascade begins. The prostate swells, the urinary outlet narrows. You strain, you wait, you hope, and those last drops still escape, leaving you frustrated and defeated. There is more to the biological picture. When you are chronically dehydrated, the blood thickens and circulation to the pelvic floor muscles slows. These are the muscles responsible for holding the final drops, maintaining a strong stream, and keeping you in control. When their blood supply weakens, so does their function. That is why you feel that dribble you cannot stop. That is why long car rides cause anxiety. That is why you lie awake at night calculating when the next bathroom trip is coming. Most men conclude from these symptoms that the prostate is simply too large, or that surgery is the only remaining option. But if the body is chronically starved of adequate, appropriately timed water, no pill, no procedure, and no supplement can break the inflammation cycle. The solution must begin at the source. Hydration is not simply about drinking more water. It is about giving the bladder and prostate fluid that calms rather than burns, fluid that supports circulation rather than restricts it. When the prostate stops fighting and the bladder stops reacting, everything changes. Control returns. Sleep returns. Confidence returns. And relief can begin within just 24 hours once you understand how hydration actually works at the biological level. In the next section, I am going to expose the biggest hydration mistake that keeps the prostate inflamed and forces nighttime urination. Almost every man I work with makes this mistake without realizing it. Once you see it clearly, you will never approach your morning the same way again. 2. Hydration mistake number 1. Coffee before water there is a moment every morning that quietly sets the tone for your entire day. Most men never think about it. They open their eyes, swing their legs out of bed, and reach for the same thing they have reached for every day for decades. That first cup of coffee. It feels familiar, almost earned, a ritual built through years of early mornings and hard work. But here is the physiological truth that few men ever hear. That first sip may be the very thing triggering the urgency, the burning, the weak stream, and the disrupted sleep that now rule your life. Stay with me, because what follows could be the turning point you have been looking for. After 6 to 8 hours of sleep, the body wakes in a natural state of dehydration. You have lost fluid through respiration and metabolic activity all night long. The blood is thicker, the bladder is more sensitive, the urine is already at its most concentrated of the entire day. In that biologically fragile state, the body is asking for gentle replenishment, warmth, hydration, calm. But instead of answering that request, many men immediately introduce caffeine, one of the most potent diuretics available without a prescription. The moment coffee enters the system, it signals the kidneys to excrete more water. You lose precious hydration at the exact moment your body is most depleted. The consequences unfold quickly. The bladder fills with highly concentrated urine that irritates its lining. The prostate, already under pressure from overnight inflammation, tightens further around the urinary outlet. And suddenly you are standing over the toilet, fighting for a stream your body is too physiologically stressed to produce comfortably. What makes this pattern so damaging is how predictable and self-reinforcing it becomes. The morning irritation follows you into the afternoon. The urgency creates anxiety. The anxiety creates muscle tension. The tension worsens control. You begin avoiding long walks, long drives, and intimate moments, not because the prostate has crossed some irreversible threshold, but because the morning set an inflammatory tone that the body never fully recovered from during the day. But here is the biological reality. I have observed countless men transform their mornings with one precise change. Water first, coffee second. When the body receives water before caffeine, the urine is diluted, the bladder is biochemically soothed, and the prostate relaxes rather than tightening. The stream becomes more reliable, the pressure fades, and the day begins with control rather than chaos. Many men who make this single shift report noticeable improvement within 24 to 72 hours. That is how quickly the body responds when you stop attacking its most vulnerable biological window of the day. In the next section, I will reveal another hidden hydration pattern that nearly every man over 60 follows, one that directly sabotages sleep and forces multiple nighttime bathroom trips. Once you understand the mechanism, breaking this cycle may be the key to finally sleeping through the night. 3. Hydration mistake number 2. The desert to flood pattern there is a hydration pattern that silently damages the bladder and burdens the prostate. Most men have been living it for decades without recognizing the harm it causes. because it feels completely normal. It begins with prolonged neglect. Hours pass where almost nothing is consumed. You push through the morning and afternoon, convincing yourself you are not particularly thirsty, that you are too busy, that you will catch up later. The day passes like a desert, dry, depleted, the body quietly rationing what little fluid remains. Then evening arrives. Guilt sets in, or fatigue, or a glance at a forgotten water bottle. So you drink, 2 or 3 large glasses consumed quickly, believing you are making a responsible correction. But instead of restoring balance, you are shocking the system. You are flooding a bladder that has been under chronic stress all day with a sudden large volume of fluid it is not prepared to manage. The kidneys scramble to process the overload. The prostate, already inflamed, becomes trapped between pressure from above and pressure from below. The bladder walls stretch rapidly, and the body responds the only way it can, by waking you repeatedly through the night demanding relief. This is the physiological mechanism behind the sleepless nights so many men accept as inevitable. This is why men lie in the dark, exhausted, frustrated, calculating the distance to the bathroom and wondering how something as basic as urination has consumed this much of their life. And yet, in the morning, the cycle begins again, never recognizing that the pattern itself is the problem. The desert to flood cycle creates damage in 2 distinct ways. During the dry phase, urine becomes concentrated and chemically harsh, burning the bladder lining and irritating the prostate. During the evening flood, the bladder is forced to contract violently under sudden pressure, fatiguing the very muscles that are supposed to provide control. The result is broken sleep, rising inflammation, progressive weakening of the pelvic floor, and the exhaustion that itself worsens hormonal balance and increases prostate sensitivity. It is a self-sustaining cycle that traps men in progressive decline. But here is the biological principle most men never encounter. You cannot correct dehydration retroactively. You cannot undo a day of fluid deficit with one concentrated evening surge. Hydration is a rhythm, a steady, consistent biological input, not a rescue maneuver. When water is distributed evenly and gently throughout the day, the bladder stays calm, the urine stays diluted, inflammation is suppressed before it can take hold. The nights become quiet. And the most remarkable aspect of this shift is its speed. Many men notice fewer nighttime interruptions and a calmer stream within just a few days of changing this single pattern. The body rewards consistency with surprising speed. 4. Hydration mistake number 3. Chugging too much water in the morning. There is a mistake many men make in the name of health and self-discipline. It feels like taking control. You wake up one morning resolved to change, fed up with the sleeplessness, the embarrassment, the exhaustion, so you grab a large glass or bottle and consume it rapidly, believing you are flushing the system, creating a clean biological slate for the day ahead. The intention is admirable. The biological result is the opposite of what you expect. Your bladder is not a passive reservoir waiting to be filled. It is a muscular organ with defined capacity limits and a sophisticated nervous system connection. When flooded with a large volume of water all at once, particularly in the morning when it has been under nighttime stress and is already sensitized, it is forced to stretch rapidly beyond its comfortable range. That sudden stretch does not relax the pelvic floor. It panics it. The nerves of the bladder wall and pelvic floor fire urgency signals. Muscles that should be easing into the day instead brace against the pressure. The result is not strength. It is premature fatigue, instability, and a bladder that struggles to empty fully before the morning has even properly begun. For men with any degree of prostate enlargement, the consequences compound. The enlarged prostate narrows the urethral channel like a partial obstruction. When the bladder is overloaded quickly, it must work against both its own overstretched walls and that narrowed outlet. The result is incomplete emptying. What remains stagnates. Stagnant urine is chemically irritating, biologically inflammatory, and structurally damaging to the bladder lining over time. The feeling of never being truly empty becomes a constant companion, a heaviness that sits in the lower abdomen and refuses to lift. Many men suffer this in complete silence, too private, too proud, or too conditioned to endure without complaint. They stand at the toilet, waiting and straining, pretending to be fine, while internally they feel a loss of control that cuts deeper than the physical symptom itself. They begin to accept this as the cost of aging. But it is not. The body does not heal when it is overwhelmed. It heals when it is supported with consistency and appropriate pacing. Gentle, steady hydration gives the bladder time to adapt, the pelvic nerves time to settle, and the prostate time to relax. Replacing the aggressive morning chug with slow, controlled sipping allows bladder tone to rebuild within days. The stream strengthens. The pressure eases. The sense of incomplete emptying begins to resolve. It is not dramatic, but it is real. And it is biological. 5. Hydration mistake number 4. Drinking only when thirsty there is a deeply held belief most men carry through their entire lives without ever questioning it. It sounds logical, practical, natural. Drink when you are thirsty. Trust your body to signal what it needs. Wait for the message before you respond. For men over 60, this belief is not just inaccurate, it is physiologically dangerous. Because by the time thirst registers, the biological damage has already been underway for some time. Here is the clinical reality. Thirst is not an early warning system. It is a late-stage signal, a biological alarm that fires only after the body is already meaningfully behind on fluid. By the time thirst is felt, the bladder lining has already begun to dry and tighten. The urine has already acidified to a level that irritates the prostate. Inflammation is already building. The pelvic floor muscles are already under increased strain. Waiting for thirst to guide hydration is the physiological equivalent of waiting for smoke before checking for fire. This problem intensifies with age. The biological mechanisms that detect early dehydration, osmoreceptors in the brain, baroreceptors in the circulatory system, become progressively less sensitive over time. Men in their 60s and 70s can be significantly dehydrated without feeling thirsty at all. The body grows silent before it grows desperate. And so hours pass without adequate fluid. Urine concentrates into a powerful chemical irritant. The bladder contracts more aggressively in response, and pelvic control slowly erodes, all while the man believes he is fine because he does not feel thirsty. What makes this especially difficult to recognize is the emotional narrative that builds around it. Many men blame themselves for the progressive loss of control. They call themselves weak. They joke about it publicly while carrying real fear privately. They wonder whether their independence, their mobility, their dignity are slowly narrowing. But the body is not failing. It is responding biochemically and predictably to a pattern of insufficient hydration. When men replace reactive hydration with proactive scheduled fluid intake, the biological response is often striking. The bladder softens, the irritation fades, the urgency loosens its grip, pelvic floor circulation improves, confidence returns, and these changes frequently appear not after months of effort, but within days of consistent application. The body rewards a steady, disciplined rhythm, not crisis response, not desperate compensation, simply water delivered consistently before the body begins to suffer. 6. Prostate Hydration Protocol. Step 1. The warm water reset. There is a moment every morning when the body is at its most biologically vulnerable. Most men never recognize it. It arrives the instant you open your eyes, before the demands of the day have registered, before caffeine, before movement. Inside the body, a quiet crisis is already in progress. After hours without fluid, the bladder is fatigued. The urine is at its most concentrated. The prostate is under accumulated overnight pressure. The pelvic nervous system is primed for tension rather than ease. This is the most physiologically fragile window of the entire day. And what you choose to do in the first 20 minutes determines whether the hours ahead are spent in control or in discomfort. And this is where transformation becomes possible. The most effective single action you can take for your prostate health in that moment is not medication, not a supplement, not a targeted exercise. It is a glass of warm water, not ice-cold water that shocks smooth muscle and tightens vascular tissue, not a large volume that overloads the bladder before it has awakened. Simply 10 to 14 ounces of warm water, enough to gently replenish what was lost through the night, but not enough to overwhelm a system that is just beginning to reactivate. The warmth itself carries biological significance. It signals the autonomic nervous system to shift toward its parasympathetic rest and restore state rather than its sympathetic stress response. The bladder walls soften rather than contracting. The pelvic floor muscles begin to release their overnight tension. The prostate's grip on the urethral outlet gradually eases, allowing a smoother, more complete flow. The concentrated morning urine is diluted before it has the opportunity to irritate the bladder lining. I have seen men in their 60s and 70s break years of established suffering with this one precise change. Men who had navigated their nights in exhausted fragments, shuffling to the bathroom repeatedly, suddenly sleeping through for the first time in months. Men who feared mornings because of the burning urgency and the weak, uncertain stream, experiencing instead a calm, reliable release. Men who had quietly resigned themselves to progressive loss of control, noticing control returning, quietly, steadily, like a light slowly brightening in a room that had been dark for too long. Warm water first thing in the morning improves pelvic circulation, dilutes irritating urine before it can trigger inflammation, prevents the nervous system from entering the defensive state that turns urination into a struggle, and communicates to the body at the most fundamental biological level that it is being supported rather than depleted. One man told me recently that his body had felt as though it was holding its breath for years. The first warm glass, he said, was the moment it finally exhaled. That is precisely what happens when a biological system receives exactly what it needs at exactly the right time, not force, not intervention. Restoration. 7. Prostate Hydration Protocol, Steps 2, 3. And for the body does not heal through force. It heals through rhythm. And when it comes to prostate and bladder health, the difference between ongoing suffering and genuine relief often comes down not to how much water you drink, but to the pattern in which it arrives. Chaotic hydration, large volumes consumed suddenly, followed by long dry stretches, creates a biological environment of chronic stress. Steady paced hydration creates the internal calm the prostate needs to reduce inflammation and restore function. The second step of the protocol is consistent, gentle sipping throughout the day. 4 to 6 ounces every 60 minutes is sufficient to keep urine diluted and chemically mild, to protect the bladder lining from irritation, and to maintain the pelvic floor circulation that supports muscular control and prevents the dribbling that causes so much private distress. Small regular inputs allow the kidneys to process fluid at a sustainable rate and prevent the bladder from ever reaching the point of painful urgency. It is the difference between feeding a system and flooding it. The early afternoon hours deserve particular attention. This is the window when cumulative dehydration from the morning tends to surface, when energy drops, when pelvic muscle tone weakens, and when men most commonly reach for caffeine to push through the fatigue. But caffeine in the afternoon tightens the bladder and pulls further fluid from a system already under strain. Choosing water instead, a full, deliberate glass, lifts mental clarity without the physiological cost. The urgency softens. The afternoon becomes manageable rather than anxious. The body arrives at evening in a state of biological balance rather than accumulated deficit. The fourth step is the evening cutoff, finishing the last full glass of water at least 1 hour before bed. This is not dehydration. It is timing. It gives the kidneys sufficient processing time so that the bladder is not receiving new fluid volume as sleep begins. It tells the nervous system that the biological workload of the day is complete. It allows the pelvic floor to relax into rest rather than remaining vigilant for the next surge. Men who implement this step consistently describe waking up surprised, not by an urgent bathroom need, but by the realization that it is morning and they slept without interruption. For men who have not experienced that for years, it can feel almost unbelievable, but it is simply the body responding to rhythm, doing exactly what it is biologically designed to do when given the conditions it needs. Consistency over time compounds these effects. As urine stays diluted, inflammation subsides at the tissue level. As the bladder receives predictable, manageable inputs, its muscular tone improves. As pelvic floor circulation is supported by steady hydration, control strengthens and the embarrassment of leakage begins to recede. These changes are not dramatic in their arrival, but they are real, they are measurable, and they are achievable for men at any age. 8. Real patient results and what they teach us some of the most instructive lessons in medicine do not emerge from laboratory data or published trials. They come from the men sitting across the desk, the real human cost of conditions that are manageable but never properly addressed. One of the most meaningful conversations of my career happened not in a procedure room, but in a quiet office when a 67-year-old man, a former military officer, a father who had spent his entire life defined by discipline and physical capability, looked down at his hands and said, almost inaudibly, "I cannot control my own body anymore. I do not feel like myself." Years of disrupted sleep, progressive urgency, the constant threat of embarrassment had worn through something essential in him. He had stopped doing the things that brought him meaning. The long walks, the travel, the quiet intimacy with his wife, not because those things were gone, but because managing his bladder had become the organizing principle of his daily life. What struck me was not the severity of his symptoms. It was how unnecessary his suffering had been. When I explained the hydration protocol, the warm water reset, the steady hourly intake, the afternoon choice, the evening cutoff, he followed it with the same precision he had applied to everything in his life. 3 days later, he reported sleeping 5 hours without interruption for the first time in over a year. Within a week, he slept through the night. Within 2 weeks, the urgency had eased substantially, and he had resumed the walks he had quietly abandoned months before. His wife came with him to a follow-up appointment. She said simply, "Thank you for giving him back to himself. I did not give him anything." The biology was already there, waiting. What changed was the information and the decision to apply it. Stories like his are not exceptional. They are what happens when men stop accepting progressive loss as inevitable and start engaging with the biology that is actually driving their symptoms. The body is not failing these men. It is responding logically, predictably, to patterns that were never examined. Change the pattern and the biology follows, often within days, not months. Days, if you are ready for that kind of change, the path is in front of you. And it begins with something as accessible and immediate as a warm glass of water. 9. Conclusion. Your new beginning starts now, gentlemen. Take a moment and consider what brought you here. Perhaps it was the accumulated exhaustion of another fragmented night. Perhaps it was the quiet indignity of the final drip that no amount of waiting could prevent. Perhaps it was the gradual realization that your world was narrowing, that you were making smaller and smaller decisions based on proximity to a bathroom, and that this was not the life you intended to be living. Whatever brought you here, understand this clearly, you are not trapped, and you are not beyond recovery. The biology driving your symptoms is well understood, and the path forward is far simpler than most men expect. You have learned today that the prostate and bladder are sensitive, responsive structures that do not thrive under biological stress. You have learned that chronic dehydration, silent, cumulative, invisible, is one of the most powerful drivers of inflammation, urgency, and disrupted sleep. You have learned that the most common hydration habits among older men are actively working against their own biology. Coffee before water, long dry stretches followed by sudden floods, aggressive morning consumption, waiting passively for thirst that arrives too late. Each of these patterns, carried out with good intentions, creates the exact internal environment that makes the prostate most vulnerable. And you now understand the alternative. Your body thrives on rhythm. It responds to the warm water reset that begins the day with calm rather than aggression. It responds to small, steady sips that keep the internal environment balanced and chemically mild throughout the day. It responds to the deliberate afternoon choice, water instead of caffeine, that supports pelvic function rather than undermining it. It responds to the evening cutoff that allows sleep to arrive and restoration to begin. The speed at which these changes produce results continues to surprise men who have been living with this for years, days, not months. Because the body does not need to be rebuilt. It simply needs to stop being disrupted. When the disruption ends, the biology reasserts itself. Control returns. Sleep returns. Confidence returns. The world becomes larger again. I have spent decades working at the intersection of biology and human health, studying how the simplest, most fundamental inputs shape outcomes that feel dramatic only because we stopped expecting them. Water, timed correctly and consumed with understanding rather than habit, is one of those inputs. It is not a cure. It is a restoration of the conditions under which the body heals itself. You deserve that restoration, not eventually. Starting tomorrow morning, take the warm glass of water, follow the rhythm, pay attention to the changes. They will come, and when they do, they will remind you of something important. Your body has not given up on you. It has simply been waiting for you to give it what it needs. If you are ready for more guidance, more science-based strategies, and more practical support designed specifically for men over 60, stay connected here. I am here to walk through every step of this with you. Your recovery begins now.